So webinar has started. I think we'll wait a few minutes so participants can come in. For anyone who's already here, welcome. Thanks for joining. Okay, some participants are joining. Welcome again to everyone. We'll just wait another few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, and then start. But thanks everyone for joining. Okay, I see more and more people joining, so I think maybe just another minute. Okay, I guess we can start now. Yeah, thanks again everyone for joining. I'm Andrea from Briink, and today I'm with Ben, a colleague here for this Unlocking ESG Knowledge with AI webinar series. This is the second webinar of this series that we're launching. The series is all about AI and ESG. How can AI technology improve the quality of our ESG work? This is specifically focused on enhancing ESG quality with AI. So we'll just start the webinar. First, before getting started, a few information about it. We are recording this webinar. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And if that final Q&A section is not enough, you can always contact either me or Ben at our emails. Mine is andrea@briink.com, and Ben's email is ben@briink.com. So a few words about Briink for those that don't know us. We are an AI startup. Our sort of mission is to supercharge ESG and sustainability professionals and helping them get instant high-quality insights from unstructured ESG data. So we see AI as really a solution that can help ESG professionals improve their quality of their work and being more productive. We are already working with many clients across different industries. Here you see some logos, but I'm really happy to expand the community of ESG and AI professionals. Some other information about Briink. So our sort of mission and vision is to help professionals, ESG sustainability professionals, improve their work, and by doing that, directly or indirectly, then helping mobilize money into sustainable business activities. So by better analyzing ESG data and by improving their work, we believe we can help them also decide, be better at decision making and understanding where those money that are important to be invested in real sustainable activities should go. We are residents at the AI campus, which is a community for AI startups in Berlin. You can follow us on LinkedIn, on YouTube, or on our website to stay up to date with our developments. So in today's agenda, we will do an intro to data quality in ESG. This will be done by Ben. Ben will also talk about why ESG sustainability professionals should care about the quality of their data. And after that, I will then talk more about the technology solutions, specifically how AI can practically improve the quality of ESG data. And at the end, there will be a Q&A section. But without further ado, let's dive in. Ben, I will leave the words to you to introduce yourself and continue.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. I'm Ben Howard Cooper, the Head of Sustainable Finance at Briink. And over the next 10-15 minutes or so, I'm going to walk you through some core pressures around ESG data. Why does it matter? Why are we talking about this so much? What are some of the core pain points we face? And I think most importantly, how artificial intelligence tools can help all ESG practitioners do their jobs better, faster, and more accurately. When we talk about ESG data and the emergence of ESG data in the conversation, there are three core pressure points that practitioners are facing, whether you are an investor, you are a corporate, or you are part of the services industry that is supporting these market participants on their ESG journey. And the first is really around emerging global regulatory requirements. There has been, over the last 5 years in particular, an emergence of global regulatory regimes, predominantly centered in Europe, that have impacted corporations globally and investors globally who want to do business in the European Union. So we talk a lot in Europe around the CSRD, the really impacting the corporate side, and the SFDR impacting the financial market side. I think there's a common misconception that these are European regulations, and so they affect European actors. That is certainly the case. But the cost of doing business with the European Union is conforming to these regulations, depending on how big your company is. So there's an increasing pressure to really respond to this emerging regulatory landscape. And while Europe is leading the way, they are certainly not the only ones. We, in the United States, we have the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is implementing new rules around financial market participants, disclosures on non-financial metrics around sustainability. Asia-Pac has also been implementing new regulations and frameworks to be supportive in how companies are expected to report on their ESG performance. But it's not just a regulatory question. If we could just go back to the last slide. It's not just a regulatory question. There's pressure coming from all parts of the market. Consumers are putting a lot of pressure on organizations to report on their sustainability performance. So for investors, the limited partners, the LPs, are creating a lot of pressure to report even outside of regulation. What we're finding is that investors are saying the regulatory regimes are good, but they're not enough. There's further additional ESG data that they would like to collect as part of their due diligence and monitoring processes, which creates additional burdens on organizations to respond across a broad range of ESG data requests. And of course, there's also the emerging understanding that ESG data helps organizations function better. ESG is a framework that helps organizations better understand the risks that they are facing through their operating models, but also importantly, the impacts that they're having on their shared communities. And as there is increasing consumer pressure, regulatory pressure, and investor pressure, understanding the role that organizations have not only on the risk that they face, but on the impacts that they generate is becoming increasingly critical. Next slide. So there are a number of different pressures, which we touched a little bit on, but I'm going to do a deeper dive on around ESG data quality. And so the first is really around a lack of global methodologies. There has certainly been great progress over recent years on creating a common measurement system around core parts of ESG. I think in particular, we talk around the cohesion around GHG measurement methodologies. We are far away from being in a perfect place, but there has been a lot of great work to make sure that when people are revealing their GHG emissions, they're doing so in a standardized and consistent way. So you can look at reporting from 2 different companies in 2 different sectors and 2 different geographies and understand how their emissions look compared to one another. Again, we have a lot of work to do, but there's been some progress there. But that's only on GHG emissions. There are a lot of other data points that are critical to ESG data analysis that have not received that same level of standardization or methodological approach. Another core issue around ESG data is that it does not exist in a silo. It belongs to all parts of an organization. So it requires coordination and collaboration with different stakeholders who may not have the requisite level of ESG knowledge to complete some of these data gathering exercises. So this upskilling and coordination around different parts of an organization creates a ton of pressure on those responsible for aggregating, analyzing, and reporting on ESG data. There's also the question around trustworthiness when you look at ESG data. We are a little bit away from assured ESG data. We'll talk a little bit later on about the timeline around auditing and assurance for ESG data. But right now, when you look at ESG reports, a lot of it is taken as on a reported basis. There's not this second set of eyes to look over things and ensure that they are being reported in accordance with certain frameworks. And that lack of second set of eyes creates some questions around whether or not this ESG data is even trustworthy to begin with. ESG practitioners will know very well the pain points around restatements, all of which creates real complexities when it comes to using this data to make decisions. And it's critical to understand ESG data does not exist in a vacuum. It really is intended to be used for operations and communications. And so the level of trustworthiness that exists within ESG data is really critical. And then I think finally the last step to really understand, and this is deeply interconnected, but the last one is really around the role of proxy or estimated data. Again, those of us who are used to using ESG data will know the pain point very well of asterisks and estimated data, where they might report a certain number, but if you dig a little bit deeper into the footnotes, you find out that they've really only reported for a certain part of their business. It doesn't describe the full scope of their operations. And being able to understand how a data point looks vis-a-vis the entire operational spectrum is really difficult. I think it's important to recognize financial markets had about 100 years of regulation to get to the standardized form that we have today, where you can look at an income statement or balance sheet across companies and roughly understand that they're talking about the same thing. ESG data regulation has really only been a conversation for the last decade, and again, really only for the last 3 or 4 years to the level that we talk about in finance. And so what we're trying to do is sort of fly the plane and build it at the same time, which creates pressures. Next slide. But it's not all lost. I think one of the things that we really want to impart today are, how do we use some of these emerging technologies, particularly artificial intelligence and large language models, to help ameliorate some of these pain points, to help support ESG analysts in what has become a gargantuan task of data management. There are 4 core cases that we will talk about throughout today's session, but the first one I want to talk about is really around extracting ESG data at scale. There's a common saying in management, which is if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So this first layer of being able to understand fundamentally what's happening at the ESG performance level at a company is really critical and also very time consuming. Going through thousands of pages of unstructured reports to find that one little nugget of data is time consuming, and it takes away resources from being able to do more value additive activities, like pushing forward on sustainability initiatives. The second is really around, Andre, just the last slide. The second is really around mapping data to frameworks. I think as we just mentioned, there's this proliferation of ESG data requests. There's regulations. There are other types of frameworks. There's bespoke frameworks that certain stakeholders are asking for, whether those are your clients who are asking them from suppliers, or it's investors who are asking it from their investees. And all of these data requests are often asking for similar types of data points, perhaps in different phrasing. And using AI can help in creating a data lake and then extracting the right data for the right question, clearing a lot of capacity from ESG analyst workload. Knowledge sharing, also really critical in this dynamic world of ESG regulations and frameworks. There's a lot of confusion around what some of the terminology means. Again, as we highlighted, ESG data belongs to everyone in an organization. So it's not just the ESG manager or the sustainability team. Procurement, HR, operations are all involved in collecting and don't necessarily have the expert level ESG knowledge. AI can step in and help explain to the right people at the right time what exactly is needed of them in human language. For those of us who work in ESG data, I think we've all sort of become proficient in the legalese that you see in these ESG frameworks. but that's just us. And a lot of people who we need to coordinate and collaborate with don't have that same exposure. So making sure that we're using these tools to help facilitate knowledge sharing, really critical. And the final step is really around transparency of methodologies. I think as highlighted, ESG data extraction can have this common issue around ring fencing. What type of data is being described? What parts of the organization is it relevant for? And AI can do really intelligent things of looking at data points and then contextualizing what that data point entails, understanding, what parts of the organization it's including, what methodology was used for calculation, again, creating transparency and better usability around ESG data. Next slide. Next couple of slides, I'm just going to show some infographics that really crystallize some of the points that we've just discussed for the last 10 minutes. And the first is really around increasing pressure for ESG data quality. There are a number of different sources that are driving issues around ESG reporting, and this is specifically around corporates. But we can see here from this KPMG survey that investors are the primary source of pressure on corporates when it comes to their ESG reporting. This, of course, is a consequence of two factors. When we think about investors, they are interested in tracking ESG performance at the corporate level, at their investee level, so that they can help manage their risks and also help implement opportunities if they have an impact thesis as well. Of course, this is coming from their own regulatory burden. So the SFDR, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, requires that financial market participants who want to sell financial products in the European Union have to describe the sustainability footprint of their funds. This, of course, requires data collection from their investee companies, which creates this downstream pressure. So if you are an investor and you are under this regulatory regime, or you are an investor who has an impact thesis, or you're an investor who thinks about ESG risks, you are going to be asking this type of data from your companies. Of course, regulators are also another major source of pressure, interestingly, a little bit less than the investor level. And this speaks to the regulations that corporations are facing in the European context, the CSRD, again, a disclosure regulation around non-financial information, but globally also new regimes which are coming into place. There is also the rise of employees and new hires. There is a generational understanding that there, particularly amongst the millennials and Gen Z, this desire to work in organizations that have good sustainability footprints, that are conscious of their space and their operating environment, how they touch and impact their shared communities. And so there is this pressure from the employee level to really push on being more transparent around their non-financial information. At the bottom here, but still a significant pressure, is around customers. So corporates are finding that when they're interacting with their clients, they need to be more transparent around what their impact is, so that I, as a customer, when I spend my money, can understand where that money is flowing into. Am I supporting a sustainable product? Am I potentially buying a product that doesn't have a good sustainability footprint? But these four core pillars are really what's driving a lot of pressure around corporate reporting. Next slide.
Sorry, Ben, just before you continue, I wanted to say that participants, you can leave questions in the Q&A sections, in the Q&A section of the webinar. We are already receiving some, but yeah, feel free to send more in the Q&A section, and we will answer at the end most or some of the questions. Thanks. Sorry, Ben, for interrupting.
Thanks, Andrea. No worries. Now, there are certain steps that organizations can take to prepare for this flood of ESG data, and this falls before implementing artificial intelligence tools or data tracking tools, and is really about preparing the organization to actually ingest this data and to understand this data. You don't just take a blank slate and apply an AI tooling on top of it. There is preparatory work that needs to go in, and it really comes from assigning responsibilities and resources. ESG data reporting is a resource-intensive activity, and there need to be points of contact and points of responsibility who can usher internal resources to gather the right amount of data. The second is really about communicating. You need to speak with all parts of the organization that are involved in collecting this data and explain why their role in this ESG data collection process is so critical and how it will help inform better decision-making, and better communication with core stakeholders. Also, it's critical to think about ESG data, not only from your own internal purposes, but understanding your external stakeholders, whether those are investors, regulators, customers, or otherwise, who might also have other incentives to have other types of ESG data reported, which will help inform your overall strategy. This is a really critical step around prioritization. When we talk about ESG data, there is an idea that you have to boil the ocean, that you have to respond to every single ESG data point, that you need to have an answer for every single ESG question in a regulatory framework or a reporting framework, which is simply not the case. It's not possible. The idea of materiality is really critical here. So taking a deep reflection of what are the data points that actually explain my impact on the community? What are the data points that explain the key risks that I face as an organization as it pertains to ESG? And then focusing in on those enables an organization to do that work at a higher quality and also to be more transparent. I think if you throw out a huge data dump, it can be very hard to sift through it. And if you're more tailored and more precise around the data points which better tell the ESG risk profile, you're in a better place and you're able to use AI technologies more effectively. And then finally, the last step is to innovate and to engage around this data, not to just let it live in a silo, but to really think about how is this going to be used. Next slide. There are two infographics here that I wanted to just take a couple of minutes to touch on. The first on the bottom left is the timeline around CSRD. And what it shows is a pretty slow integration towards the broader global economy being exposed to some of these core regulations. You can see by 2029, a large part of the European economy and as a consequence, a large part of the global economy will be under these regulatory regimes. But a critical part to also see here is that there are progressively intense levels of assurance and auditing that would be put in place around ESG data. So for the last decade or so, ESG data has been reported on a discretionary basis. Organizations have had the ability to go and report as they see best, of course, using some of these global methodologies. But these European regulations, global regulations in general, are creating more pressure on organizations to actually have that second set of eyes come in and actually verify that this data was collected in an appropriate way that is fitting global best practice methodologies. So it's really critical as you're thinking about using AI tooling, as you're thinking about your ESG data, to keep an eye on the upcoming assurance requirements and understand that having an auditable trail of evidence, being able to explain to an auditor how you got your data point, what that data point means, is going to become even more important. So being able to use these technologies in a smart and effective way will prepare you for the upcoming burdens, which are going to impact all parts of the ESG economy. And on the right side, this is a really interesting graph that comes from Neo4j. It's a knowledge database that shows the interactions of all of the key stakeholders when it comes to ESG data and reporting. And as you can see, it touches broad parts of an organization, broad parts of the economy, and highlights the complexity and pain points that all of us are facing when we think about responding to these regulatory frameworks or these discretionary frameworks. Next slide. Interestingly, there are differences in opinions and pain points depending on whether you are looking at ESG data from the lens of a corporate or an investor. Broadly, what we can see on the graph on the left is a recognition or a desire to have one sustainability framework which you are reporting against. There have been a lot of efforts around consolidation in the ESG reporting framework space, whether those are nonprofits who are seeking to create a unified organization, or there's regulators who are communicating across discretionary frameworks to ensure consistency and interoperability, but there's still work to be done. And so there's a global desire to see a deeper consolidation so that as a corporate, as an investor, you know where to find the data. The data needs to be presented in one singular way rather than having to respond to all of these, but we are a far way away. We know already that the GRI is interacting with EFRAG around European regulation reporting, aligning to the GRI standards. There's work certainly happening across ISB as well. But again, this will take time. And even as we have conversations around consolidating frameworks, new frameworks are still appearing. And so there is this global desire, but we're still a little bit away from being able to have one common standard, one common framework that everyone can use. And last thing to show on this slide is really the graph on the right, which highlights a very interesting delta between investors and executives at corporations. What we can see is that investors are generally looking to have companies required by law to issue sustainability reports. Now, why is that? It's what we've just discussed for the last 20 minutes. There are increasing pressures on investors to report on their exposure to sustainability risks and opportunities through their investee companies. It takes a lot of work on the investor side to engage with companies and extract that data if it isn't being reported under a standardized regulatory regime. And so having a by law sustainability report would give investors a greater ability to extract the data they need and to make better decisions. Executives, of course, are a little bit more wary of that. They understand the burden that comes through increased reporting pressures and would like to potentially see more discretionary reporting. Next slide. And I'm going to hand it over to Andrea, who'll talk a little bit more broadly around ESG and AI.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I wanted to switch to this sort of more practical side of the discussion on AI and technology with this article. This is a recent paper that was published by Harvard Business School and BCG, because it's one of the first papers that actually studied how AI tools can improve the productivity and quality of our work. Specifically, these two organizations for these papers looked at consultants. There were two groups of consultants at BCG-X. One group of consultants was using GPT-4, and the other group of consultants was not using GPT-4. And so basically then Harvard Business School and BCG made some comparisons on the output and the work that was produced by these two groups. And they've seen that the group using GPT-4 completed on average more tasks, specifically 12.2% more tasks. They were quicker, specifically 25% quicker, and 40% of the trial group also produced higher quality results. I wanted to share this paper because sometimes, or often we think that AI or technology can decrease the quality of our work. It can definitely improve the productivity, but sometimes it decreases the work, the quality of the work. Instead, with this paper, which is just one paper for sure, and it is applied to just one specific task, we've seen that AI tools like GPT-4 can improve the productivity of workers, but it can also improve the quality of our work. And so, yeah, wanted to share it with you. Moving on to the next slide. So AI can help us in our work. And there's many tools out there. GPT-4 is probably the most known one, but there's really hundreds or thousands of AI tools that can help us out there. And so here I wanted to share a few tools like Chat Climate, Otter AI, and Tome that I think can help ESG professionals. Specifically, Chat Climate can help you with analyzing IPCC reports, which are super important for ESG sustainability professionals worldwide. With Chat Climate, you can analyze these reports in a faster and easier way. Otter AI is a transcribing and summarizing tool, while Tome is a tool to create presentations, and so also sustainability presentations and reports. But before jumping into the next slide, I wanted to quickly launch a poll and see if the participants are using AI tools, how they're using them, and if they trust them. So yeah, we'll just launch a poll in a second. And then I will give you, I'll wait 1 or 2 minutes for the answers to come. Okay, almost everyone already answered. I'll just wait a few seconds. Okay, I think we have answers for most of the participants. I will share the results so you can also see them. So the first question was around how often do you currently use AI tools in your ESG data workflows, pipelines? 26% of the participants answered very often, 11% quite often, 16% sometimes, 26% almost never, and 21% never. Quite interestingly, there's the sort of percentages are similar across all groups. So some of you use them very often, others don't use them never, some often, sometimes, and others almost never. And then the second question was, which is, I think in a way tells us that the adoption of these tools, even though we are a small group today in this webinar, this tells us that the adoption of these tools is still scattered, and it's not they're not yet adopted, widely adopted, I would say. What do you believe? The second question was, what do you believe is the impact of AI on the quality of your ESG data? Here, most of the answers were either positive impact, so 44% think that there's a positive impact. I think that the AI tools can be harnessed to improve the quality of data. And the 56%, so more than the majority, thinks that it depends, that the quality, that they believe that it is largely dependent on training, types of AI tools used, and on the ESG workflow where the tools are implemented. Which I think makes a lot of sense, specifically because there's a lot of AI tools out there. It really depends on how you employ those tools and if those tools are trained and can fit well in your ESG workflow. So it makes a lot of sense. And others think that there's a positive impact. So we, happy to see both of these answers, because I will briefly touch on them. But yeah, thanks everyone for answering the poll. Really, really interesting. So here I was sharing some AI tools. We at Briink are also an AI company, specifically building AI tools for ESG. So I also want to share something about what we're doing, what kind of work we're doing. And a lot of the work we're doing is around building this specialist fine-tuned AI model for ESG, as we think that this could be the sort of new frontier of AI. As I've said before, there's many AI tools out there, many general artificial intelligence tools like GPT-4. They are really good at doing a vast array of tasks. So from answering questions across a lot of topics to working with images, working with documents. However, at Briink, we believe that the new frontier of AI is fine-tuned models, or models that are vertical on a specific tasks. Specifically for Briink, we are building AI models for ESG sustainability tasks, as we see that these can significantly improve the quality of the results. So often with these general tools, you get good results, but the answers are never complete or satisfactory, and they're kind of only giving you a short answer which doesn't cover all the things that could be covered. With vertical specialist AI tools, that is completely different. So the AI models are able to give you really complex answers to complex questions. So there's a slide around Briink, our specialist AI models versus generalist AI models. As at Briink, we're really trying to understand how our models different from other models out there. But I will leave the word to Ben to continue on this slide.
Great. Thanks, Andrea. As Andrea was just mentioning, there is a big difference between a generic workflow and a specialized workflow. ESG is a specialized workflow. The type of data that we're using, the uses of that data all require a very specialized type of domain knowledge and also a specialized set of abilities. I'm sure many people on this call will commiserate that ESG data lives in all sorts of funky places, in charts and tables and pictures. It is not standardized in the same way that you might find other data like financial data. So this requires tools that have been built specifically for the purpose of helping ESG analysts to have a certain level of performance that you can trust. On the graph on the left, we show a little bit of the benchmarking work that Briink does in order to make sure that our tools are meeting the needs of our clients, but also to better understand fundamentally what this knowledge layer does, to understand how ESG specialization layered on top of foundation models can really help increase performance. And so what we see here is that Briink's models, and this is around ESG numeric extraction, perform at around a 95% rate, which means that 95% of the time, if you give it a tool request, go find me scope 1 emissions, it's able to go and pull that number out accurately. And this is with all of the complexities around, charts, tables, pictures, asterisks, so on and so forth. But if you look at some of the generic providers, the ChatGPTs and ChatPDFs, which do a fantastic job at generalist work, when it comes to ESG, they are not fit for purpose. They perform less than 50%, anywhere between 20 to 40% of the time are they actually able to extract the right information from the right source. And that's, again, because of the complexity of how ESG data is presented and the lack of training that these tools have had to go and pull out that specific type of information. Now, this is just around one specific ESG task. This is around numeric extraction. In particular, this is looking at GHG metrics, but there's a range of ESG tasks. There's the extraction of numeric data, which helps you understand fundamentally what's happening in an organization. There's also fact-checking type of ESG work. Does this company disclose their human rights policy? Does the company's human rights policy align to the OECD? There are regulatory mapping exercises, like, does the company report on any ESRS metrics, even if they don't mention it, being able to understand what the ESRS is, and then to look through the report to understand what's being reported and how that might map to other regulations. So when we at Briink are building tooling, we really think about specific subtasks that the ESG analyst is doing, what the data inputs look like, what their outputs are required, and then to build in that domain specialist knowledge on top, which is how we're able to perform at a higher level. Any good AI tooling around this sort of specialist workflow needs to have the same type of approach. And there are other products that are doing this for environmental management, that are doing this for financial management. And the best performing ones are always the ones that have taken this domain knowledge and integrated that into generic foundation models in order to get to the high performance. There are a couple of tips and tricks that I wanted to leave everyone with today when it comes to interacting with AI tooling, whether that's Briink or it's a generic or it's another specialized ESG tooling. And the takeaway from this is that prompts matter. The way that you interact with the tool has a huge impact on the quality of the data that you get out. And wanted to just share with you some best practices around what's being known as prompt engineering. You'll be hearing a lot about this. I'm sure you might have already heard about some pain points around prompt engineering, but we've gone and we've done a lot of research on what type of prompts help best with ESG data. The first one is really around being specific. These AI tools are smart, but they need to understand exactly what you're looking for to perform to your standard. So if you have a interface and you ask for scope 1 emissions, the tool may not know, are you asking around generic scope 1 emissions? Do you want to know what scope 1 emissions are? Or are you looking for the scope 1 emissions from the firm? What year are you looking for the scope 1 emissions for? So the more specific that you can direct the tool to be, the better your result is going to be aligned with your main objective. So instead of saying scope 1 emissions, creating a prompt like what were the company's scope 1 emissions in 2022 is much more likely to get you your desired request. The next is really about telling the model how you want the responses returned to you. These models are good listeners. So the more instructions you give them, the more you tell them how you want things done, the better it's going to be able to present it back. For example, if you want data returned in a chart, if you want it returned in bullet points, you can tell the models to do that, which can help you make sure that the data output is aligned to your own individual workflow. If you are a ESG consultant, you're going to have a very different workflow than if you are an ESG analyst at a fund or an ESG analyst at a corporate. And so making sure that you're telling the tool to return the results in a way that meets your needs will make sure that you're getting the results you're looking for. Third step here is really about avoiding opinion-based questions. We see quite a bit in our user data, people still figuring out how to use AI tooling. And we see quite often questions like, is this a good ESG company? Is this a sustainable company? And those are great questions to ask, but they're questions that the analyst needs to be asking. AI tooling, at least at where we are now, always requires human in the loop. If there is a solution or a tool that's saying that this can do start to finish everything that an ESG analyst is doing, take that with a grain of salt. Good ESG tooling and good ESG AI tooling in particular is one that empowers an analyst, that serves as a co-pilot, that does some of this boring, manual, repetitive work around data gathering, data mapping, and enables the analyst to actually apply their own specialized skill on top. So rather than asking a model, is this a good ESG report? Ask them, what ESG frameworks is this company reporting against? What climate risk does the company indicate that they face? Does this company report against X, Y, and Z framework if that's what you're looking for? If you're using SASB as a guide for the level of disclosures that a company must be giving, ask them, are they doing these things? And then take a step back and say, okay, is this aligned with my idea of quality? Because every analyst is going to have a different interpretation of whether a company is a good ESG company, whether a report is a good ESG report. But if you set your standards and you build those into your prompts, you're more likely to get the data that you need in order to make that decision yourself. And let's be honest, the fun part of being an ESG analyst, of working in ESG, isn't being an accountant. It isn't doing this data gathering and data mapping exercise. Let's leave that to the accountants, and let's let our ESG knowledge workers take that base information and then apply our hard-earned skills around ESG analysis to really understand fundamentally what's happening and to build out roadmaps that help drive value. The last tip here that I'll leave you all with is the more questions, the better. Let's take, for example, you want to understand whether a certain ESG report has a assurance on it, a limited assurance, and you want to know who the assurer is. You want to know what years it's been assured for. You want to know what parts of the report have been assured. It is best to break that out into multiple questions than to ask the model to look for multiple things at once. So one question that has a bunch of sub-questions in it is likely to confuse the model. It's looking for a lot of different things at once. Making sure that each specific question has a very specific deliverable is a great way to make sure that your results are performing at the best standard possible.
Thanks, Ben, for these tricks on how to write prompts. Just switching back to what we're doing at Briink, we are continuously developing new AI tools to support ESG teams. We have some different tools that I'm presenting here. Is the Good Governance Screener, the Briink ESG document chat, and the ESG questionnaire assistant. These tools do different things and help ESG professionals in different ways. The Good Governance Screener is an AI tool that generates a social and governance gap analysis by assessing policy documents such as code of conduct, whistleblowing policy, suppliers code of conduct. The ESG document chat is an AI tool where you can basically interrogate any PDF and extract ESG and sustainability metrics automatically from these PDFs. And so saving all that manual analysis that usually goes into reading these sustainability reports and finding the ESG data that you need. And lastly, the ESG questionnaire assistant is an AI tool that lets you create and run custom ESG questionnaires. And then by uploading document, you can basically receive the answer for all your ESG questions in a few minutes. So it's a tool, it's an AI tool that automates that long process of creating ESG questionnaires, answering these ESG questionnaires. I will move on to the next slides. This last tool that I presented, the ESG Questionnaire Assistant, will officially go live soon next week. We're really excited for this. You will be able to try it and use it. And it will be launched as a beta, but we will give free access to everyone, so you can try it and have a sneak peek of what our tools do. Lastly, before jumping into the Q&A, and thanks everyone for staying here. I saw no participant dropped, even though we're already at time, so really thanks for staying here. Before moving on to the Q&A section, I wanted to present this slide. So we are building these AI tools, but we really like to talk with ESG sustainability professionals and see how they're currently doing their ESG work, and provide help and feedback on what they're doing. And it does not have to just be related to our AI tools. We're really happy to understand the problems and the workflows of ESG sustainability professionals. So here there's a QR code that if you want to scan, we can schedule some calls with me and Ben, where we can basically assess your ESG data quality, understand how you're doing your ESG work, and obviously also present you our tool. But the main point of the call is to have a discussion around ESG data quality, and maybe how AI can improve that. So you can just scan the QR code or send us an email, and we can plan a call. Lastly, there's some time for Q&A. We've received some questions, so I will go into the Q&A section, and I will read them, and then we will answer them. So someone is asking, and Ben, this is a question for you. To what extent can we trust ESG data providers? What are some alternatives to using ESG proxy data?
Just 1 second for me. Great. So all ESG data providers are not the same. So I think it's really critical to understand what is their source input to gather the data. Are they looking at company level reports? Are they doing some sort of web scraping? Is it some sort of sentiment analysis? So I think it's really critical to understand first and foremost, what is this ESG data provider offering? I think it's also critical to understand what level of this data is estimated or proxied. Good ESG data providers will be transparent around what percentage of that data might be estimated, might be extrapolated based off of other base data that is included in company reports. Proxy data is important, especially in this world that we have now, where there is a mismatch between regulatory reporting requirements and the availability of reported data. Proxy data helps to put us in the right ballpark as we have expanding regulatory regimes on the corporate side, which will force greater corporate level reporting. The idea is that we move away from proxy data. Now, proxy data will always play a role for some smaller parts of the economy, SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises that won't fall under some of these regulatory regimes. But I think it's really critical to understand what you are looking for, what are your needs, and then to make sure that whatever ESG data provider you're looking at has those. Now, there are also ESG data providers like Briink that help you extract data from your sources. So not necessarily a direct data provider, but a tool provider that helps you use data. And then there's others where you just buy off the shelf. You have 10 companies that you want data on, 100 different data points, and either those already exist or they will go out and source those for you bespoke. Understanding how they pull that data and their own internal assessments of the quality. We know that there are ESG data farms around the world where the analysts are spending all of their days going through reports, tracking things in Excel. Those are somewhat subject to quality issues. So making sure that you understand the threshold for performance is also really important.
Thanks, Ben, for answering this question. I just saw that we are running out of time, and we are already over. There's some questions from Maria, Jorge, and Fitzum, but I think we will send you an answer by email, and answer your questions, and then we can schedule some follow-up calls and to answer them live. But thanks everyone for joining the webinar. We will follow up with all of you to see if we can continue the discussion, And yeah, it was really great to have you here today, and see you in the next webinar.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.